This is the motor out of the wheel stander. This is actually it's a Keith Black. This is a 535 cubic inch Hemi. This motor was making it on fuel right around 2,000 horse.
I think you gotta learn from your mistakes.
Maybe, but I've been around a few decades and here I am still making lots of mistakes. Welcome back to another poorly lit episode of Crossthread Garage and Salvage, where this week I teach Caitlin about carburetors. Caitlin, carburetors are these mystical little boxes that take air and fuel and atomize it and turn it into...
Black streaks on the pavement.
Well, black streaks on the pavement. That's what it turns it into. I was going to say horsepower, but black streaks on the pavement is exactly what carburetors turn air and fuel into. Thanks for watching. Welcome back. Make sure to watch. Make sure to watch.
Make sure to watch this whole video, guys.
Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay up to date with Caitlin and I as we navigate the challenge of reviving this 81 GMC C10. You know,
I just point that out.
sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes you buy a beat-up old Chevy with no backstory and live to regret it. Back in the garage today, and who's in the garage with us? Who's the puppies over here? This is Triggy, this is Raya, and this is Buddy. Buddy's a big boy. He's a big boy. He's a big boy. Don't make a mess.
I'm here too.
Oh yeah. Aw, who's a good girl? Who's a good girl? This is Caitlin. Don't make a mess. Look, carburetors are, to me, almost a complete mystery. Takes fuel from the fuel pump through this fuel. Look how clean that fuel is in that fuel filter. Wow.
Sparkly.
I bet that fuel tank's in pretty good shape. I really wondered about that at one point in this process, because when you got 3 extra fuel tanks sitting in the bed of a truck, when you buy it, you really begin to wonder about the condition of the tank. Anyhow.
Free flowing.
All right, so what we have here is a Carter AFB. That's a aluminum 4-barrel. This is not the original 4-barrel carburetor that came with. In fact, we know from the VIN number on this truck that it came with a 305 and a 2-barrel carburetor. This is an aftermarket carburetor, aftermarket intake right there. Fuel's coming in this side, it's filling the bowl underneath. There's a float in there that fills up. When it lifts to a certain point, it lifts a needle that plugs the seat and the fuel stops flowing into the bowl. When you hit the accelerator pump, it runs fuel out of the jets over these little venturis right here. If you don't know what a venturi is, it's those right there.
It's science.
Actually, it runs over these because this is your primary, this is your secondary. So a 4-barrel, you have 4 barrels running fuel and air down into the intake. The one with the choke on it is your primary. The secondaries don't open up until you really get into the throttle, and then you add fuel. Because you're adding fuel, you've got all sorts of jets and valves inside of there that are...
You know nothing about carburetors?
I don't know a lot about carburetors. I mean, compared to other people, I don't know a lot. These 2 guys right here are going to be what we're primarily messing with today. We're going to get this carburetor tuned using a vacuum gauge, and we're going to get it timed using a timing light. So Caitlin, the other thing we're going to be dealing with here when we're checking the timing off of the timing marks on the front of the motor and on the dampener, which is down here, we'll get a light on that later, is the distributor. So the distributor is basically running, it's geared on the bottom, it runs off of the cam, and as you turn it, you either advance or slow down the timing, which is basically when the spark hits the spark plug in the cylinder on either the rise or the fall of the piston. So you're going to advance it before the top of its throw, or retard it, slow it down after the top of its throw. And that's what you do by moving your distributor. So it has a vacuum assist here. So this vacuum assist here runs to the vacuum port on the front of the carburetor. As this air pump, this motor, draws air down through the top of the carburetor, it creates vacuum. It draws air through this. Well, that air is drawn from this ported vacuum port here, which means it's above the blades of the carburetor. Draws on the diaphragm on the back of the distributor, which advances the timing on the distributor internally, which means that the spark is hitting the cylinder at the right time for the fuel to be used efficiently and power to be delivered to the back wheels so you can leave those black marks on the pavement. Got it?
Got it.
So what we're going to do is first test for vacuum leaks, and probably not the safest way to do it, but the best way I know how is with the motor running, we're going to spray very flammable brake clean around the base of the carburetor, and if spraying it causes the engine to accelerate, we know that it's drawing air from below the carburetor into the intake manifold, and it's burning this brake clean inside the motor without actually giving the engine any throttle. So, step one, check for vacuum leaks. Correction. Step one, attach the battery. Yeah, it's good enough. Back to step one. Step two in this process, we're going to go ahead and let this warm up and get a good heat cycle in it, because there's no sense in trying to time or tune a vehicle if there's not a good heat soak, because when the heat from the motor soaks up through that intake into the bottom of the carburetor, it can drastically affect the way a vehicle runs once it's warmed up, as opposed to when it's cold like it is now. So we're going to let it heat cycle and we'll be back. Caitlin, I had a brilliant idea the other day. It's for a mind-controlled air freshener. It's kind of complicated, but it makes sense when you think about it. Now, while the C10's warming up, I'm going to talk you through what our next step's going to be here. We're going to use a product called Berryman's V12 Fuel Injector Cleaner. For those of you paying attention at home, this is a carbureted vehicle, not a fuel-injected vehicle. But what this is going to do is clean up the innards on that motor. If you watch the episode where Caitlin pulled all the spark plugs out, you'll remember the tip of the spark plugs were terribly, 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 what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know what it's called. I just know the sound it makes.
Terribly, terribly covered in soot and carbon, because the spark plugs were bad. So that means that the top of the pistons, the inside of the cylinders, the rings, all that stuff are probably similarly positioned right now. So what we're going to do is pour that right down the top of the carburetor, let it run through and burn all that junk out of there, get it really warmed it up. So here we go. First time we really ran it, and we found a new leak, which is coming from this fuel line right here, which is right above this hot exhaust. And you can see it's leaking here, leaking there, on the ground. But worse than that is the leak up front. Things just got more complicated. This is actually the first time we really got the truck up to temp and let it run and idle. And of course we ran the Berrymans through it, which we ran that thing hard enough to burn all that stuff, and it created a little bit of an awareness of a leak at the front here that we didn't know existed. And so there's really only one option for where oil comes from on the front of a truck, Caitlin. From the front seal. Which means there's a day in our future where the entire accessory drive on the front of this motor is going to come off. And we're going to have to reseal that. Well, this is our last video for YouTube. I think this project's probably run its course.
I quit. I quit. I quit.
Came back here, found out I had an exhaust leak. What? This one's leaking too? No, don't draw smiley faces with it. What is it?
Oil.
It's oil, right? That's bad. All right, two possibilities here, Caitlin. What are they?
Your front.
Front seal,
Yes.
which is what I'm assuming is going to be the reality here. Or, fingers crossed. What did we do on the front of this recently?
The transmission pan.
Nope, oil pan gasket.
Oh yeah, the oil pan. Yes.
Let's check the front of that oil pan gasket.
I'm
See
putting
what
my
this
bet
looks
on
like.
that
Because that would be easier. Where's the oil coming from?
Right there. I was right.
There. Right out of the front of that rubber oil pan gasket, which for those of you guys in the comments section, I know you're there. I know you're there. Some of you said, hey, oil leak in your future for using a rubber. I get it. I get it. The problem is not the gasket. You can clearly see the problem is the way the gasket was installed.
I did the other side. That was your side.
You are right. That was from me, sort of. Look at the way it's folded underneath there and leaking out of there. So, all right, easy fix
Easy fix.
this time.
This time. Not in the future.
Maybe since I did it last time and it didn't work, maybe you should do it this time.
I think you gotta learn from your mistakes.
Maybe, but I've been around a few decades and here I am still making lots of mistakes. The right thing to do, Caitlin, would be to fix that oil leak before we go on running the motor anymore.
But do we ever do the right thing?
No.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Oh, you know what though? We actually do need to fix that fuel leak before we run this again, since it's directly over top of a hot exhaust. That's one thing we're actually definitely
There's no we.
Definitely gonna
There's
do.
no we in Steve.
You're correct. There is no we in Steve. Does that mean that Steve is going to fix it? Well, seems to me like I had some around here not that long ago. Ah, there it is. Actually, I think that's just too small. Yeah, that's definitely too small. That is 1/4 inch, and we're probably for the supply line going to need like 5/8. So, all right. So here's what we're looking at. This line right here is the wet one, and this hose clamp is actually on top of the barb. So we're going to move it back, put a new hose clamp on there, probably fix that problem. This problem up here is a, get that light in front of it. This problem is a split hose, but that's the return line, which means there's not much leaking out of there. It's not even running down the hose here any. So fix this and we're good to go. So what we're going to do, Caitlin's took up this vacuum gauge to this port on our carburetor. This is our vacuum advance for the distributor. That's going to give us ported vacuum, not the manifold vacuum pressure here. So what we're going to do first here, Caitlin, is get our initial timing set. We need to know what the initial timing is before we start tuning on the carburetor. So we need to loosen the hold down bolt for this distributor, which on this, ouch, that's hot, is a 5/16. Loosen that and set that right up there so we can forget about it, drive off and lose it on the road. And that should, yep, allow us to move that slightly to adjust our timing. See how that slowed it down?
Yeah.
That speeds it up a little bit. Speeds it up a little bit more. What that's doing is advancing the timing on the spark. So down here on our front dampener balancer, you see the little white line that's perfectly lined up with those teeth? Mm-hmm. That's our timing mark, and those teeth are our degree of advanced or retarded timing. So the big tooth, the big gap between teeth, I should say, would be our 0 degrees. What we're going to do here in a second is hook up our timing light, and we're not going to be able to get down here because we're literally in the fan assembly with this camera right now, but we're going to get the timing light out, and that little white mark, every time it comes around, we're going to have a, well, let's hook up the timing light and I'll show it to you. Timing light out. This is basically a strobe light that's connected through this little inductive sensor to the #1 spark plug wire. Down here as close to the spark plug wire as possible. And the black one goes on the sad side of the battery, and the red one goes on the positive side. Hook up the battery for us. We're looking for between 10 and 12 degrees initial timing, and if it needs to be changed, we're going to end up rotating the distributor. Rotating it clockwise, I think, retards it, and counterclockwise advances it, if I remember correctly. Which I don't always do, you know. That's the way it is. I can't see that timing mark at all, which means we're going to need to mark it. Try this again. So what we're going to do is use a little trick I learned off YouTube, actually. And that is to paint that stripe. But you don't want to, obviously, spray the whole harmonic balancer. So we're going to use a small little thin pick here. Paint in the bottom of this cap. Dip. And go paint. We now have a nice white line on our harmonic balancer. Let's try this again. Now it's idling really rough. It's too far. Seems to like that spot right there. Yeah. We're at about 10 degrees of initial timing. And you'll notice on our vacuum gauge here, so we're pulling 0, which means that our curve idle screw is set properly. That's the screw right back here. Can you see that? This screw right here, basically just a mechanical adjustment on the idle setting. So if we dial it in, it'll speed the idle up because it moves this forward, which pulls the accelerator pump plunger down. So we want to dial that back to where it was. And what that's doing is changing the position of the blades that are in the bottom of this. So basically in the bottom of this is a set of butterfly valves that turn with this. So when this turns and those open, like that, this pushes the accelerator pump plunger down, which pushes fuel in. So as it opens up for more air, it also adds more fuel. So at idle, we're pulling 0 on the ported side, which is our timing vacuum advance for the timing, which is where we want it. We don't want it to be pulling any timing at idle. So that's right. In a minute, we're gonna switch this to this side. On this is a manifold port. So it's gonna tell us what the vacuum is inside of the manifold. All right, so now we've got it set on this manifold side. And what we're gonna do, I'll pull this up here where I can see it. Set it right there. What we're gonna do is adjust these idle mixture screws right here. And the adjustment on those idle mixture screws, we're gonna adjust. When I adjust it, this is gonna move. And you're also gonna be able to hear it. So as I turn this one in, you hear it slow down. Actually, if we turn it all the way in, you can really hear it. It's not happy with that. So let me put it back where it was. Do the same thing with this side. Go in is less fuel. We'll go all the way in. Starting to run rough. That's all the way in there. So I turned it basically 2 turns, 2 full turns. So that's 1. Go back out 2. You hear it really picked up there and smoothed out. So I don't know why, but my vacuum gauge doesn't seem to be working, Caitlin. It wasn't drawing anything out of that manifold port. So I'm thinking I may need to either get a new one or borrow one. Probably borrow one from my friend Marty and figure out what's going on here. Either that or that manifold port on that carburetor is not, it's not a manifold port? No, it's a manifold port. Or it's plugged. Something's plugging it. I don't know. We're not getting anything response there, so we're gonna have to figure that out tomorrow.
One day later.
All right, we're over here at Marty's Hot Rod Garage. This is my buddy Marty.
Hey, how we doing today?
Marty's got a YouTube channel you all should check out. We're gonna link that here in the comments. You'll find it somewhere in here. Caitlin's with me. We're on our way home from school today because the trouble we were having last night with our Carter carburetor was that we couldn't get any manifold pressure out of this vacuum port. And this Edelbrock carburetor that I knew Marty had over here working on, this 77 Jeep Cherokee, that's a copy of the Carter, right, Marty?
Yes. Yep.
So Marty is the driver of the HemiXpress wheel stander and has forgotten more about mechanicking than I've learned. So take us to town on this, Marty. What do we need to know here?
Yeah, the Edelbrock carbs they bought Carter out. This is just an old AFB carb. They're pretty simple. I mean, this is your vacuums here on the front. How I normally do those, Caitlin, though, before I even mess with those, run both these screws clear in. Your air adjustment screws, run both clear in and then back them off 1.5 turns. And that's a good starting place for these.
Like a bass tune.
Right. This one here we're working on, we're chasing a fuel issue that we thought, because it's fallen on its face, and we discovered something else, which what we'll do is we'll crank this thing over and look here, we got a plug out of this thing.
So check out that plug, Caitlin. Remember when we looked at spark plugs a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
And let me crank this over.
Would you say that plug is fouled? You'll remember the tip of the spark plugs were terribly, terribly, terribly. What's the word I'm looking for?
Hard to tell.
That's the word I was looking for last night, and I couldn't remember the word fouled. Yeah, crank on it, Marty. Show us what this weak spark looks like. That hardly light a pumpkin at Halloween.
So we're thinking that we have a spark issue with this, possibly the coil.
So this performance distributor is, would you say,
Correct.
not
right.
performing?
This should be a real white spark. You should be able to hear it snapping.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that's why the plugs look like this.
Yeah.
We're just not getting enough spark.
Yeah. All right.
So,
well, you've got a vacuum gauge that I think I might want to borrow from you, because
Sure do.
I think the one I was putting on last night was not sensitive enough to the 16 inches of mercury that we need.
Okay.
So we might grab that from you
We'll
and head
get
on
the
home.
gauge.
All right, Marty's Hot Rod Garage. Let me show you around here real quick before we're done. This is, before you walk past it, tell us what this is, Marty.
This is the motor out of the wheelstander. This is actually it's a Keith Black. This is a 535 cubic inch Hemi. We got to go through this for this season with the truck. This motor was making on fuel right around 2,000 horse. Probably on straight alcohol, it's around 1,500. So,
Man. Well, there's the distributor you need right there. Just, you can swap that, can't you?
probably not. Probably not.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
what we're looking at right there.
That'll probably do it for you.
That's what we needed right there. Cool. Thanks, Marty.
All right, no problem.
Well, what we're going to do is hook up this new vacuum gauge we borrowed, because I'm just thinking mine is not sensitive enough.
I got feelings, you know.
This is supposed to be the manifold pressure that's the same as the vacuum pressure in here in the intake manifold. And what we're going to do is actually just hook right into this vacuum port on the front here, this large one, which is a manifold port. So this is the air that's being drawn through the manifold here. It's the same pressure. This is hooked up to this PCV hose that runs over to the top of the valve cover over there, Caitlin, which takes, as an emissions control in 1981, takes the gases and the blow-by that's created when this thing is running out of the crankcase and runs it back through the intake, burns it so that it doesn't go into the air. It's a drain on horsepower is what it is, but it's there. So we're going to leave it alone and use it today to tune this carburetor. All right, so take that idle mixture screw, turn it to the right just a little bit. Watch this gauge here. Keep going.
Turn it out.
And is that tight now? All right, turn it back out. Okay, keep going until this needle right here moves. Keep going loose. Alright, you see it jumping around now?
Yeah.
Turn it back to where it's stable. A little bit more. Right there. You hear it clear up and you see how that needle is as high as it's gotten?
Yeah.
Alright, so that's how you can use the vacuum gauge to help tune the carburetor. Right?
A complete mystery.
I don't really know how it works. So what we've basically discovered is that this carburetor was put on here and tuned properly at one point, and the idle mixture screws are properly set, the curb idle screws properly set, the timing is properly set at about 12 degrees. We're going to lock down the distributor again, but you have seen how the distributor works to advance the timing. You've understood how the vacuum line works here, so that as the throttle, the RPMs increase on the motor, it draws more vacuum, and that draws through that diaphragm on the side of the distributor. It moves a set of cams inside there to vacuum advance the timing, so that the spark precedes the top dead center on the piston properly. So basically, we've got a motor that seems to be running and idling smooth. Doesn't start very well. It's got a either a weak starter or the plunger isn't engaging properly. I'm not sure. We'll figure that out on another day. Also going to go ahead and seal the leak on the front of the oil pan that we discovered when we didn't put that gasket in properly. Right. And we'll be moving on with the project here on the C10. Are you feeling better about this? All right, well, why don't you use those God-given taco clamps there to clean everything up, That would be your hands.
Hands.
And we'll get things cleaned up here and call this one a win.